All right, episode 2 of Avid Outdoors podcast, and we have Pete Senkbeil here. We're going to talk about public land hunting, so stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Tyler.
And I'm Dave.
We're charter captains from Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
We're also avid outdoorsmen. We love hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, and just being outside.
We want to connect you with the experts in the outdoors and hear your story.
We're stewards of this planet, and we want to make sure the hobbies we enjoy today are available for generations to come. This is Avid Outdoors. All right, welcome back, Avid Outdoorsmen, to another episode of Avid Outdoors podcast. I'm sitting here next to Pete Senkbeil. Pete, we've been friends for quite some time. We actually started out fishing together back on Lake Michigan, tournament fishing like Coho Derby and Sheboygan and things like that.
Sure did.
But I know that you are far more actively involved in hunting, the hunting community, and all sorts of different species. So I really want to talk to you about that. First of all, I want to know what your background is. How'd you get started? What's it led to, that sort of thing.
I mean, my start in hunting, I think it would be, kind of the classic Wisconsin. My family was a big hunting family, especially on my dad's side. So my grandfather, uncles, all my brothers had some cousins that hunted. So, I mean, it mostly was, started doing some small game hunting when I was younger. And then when I got a little older, I started going out gun deer hunting with my dad before I could even hunt. I just liked going out. I just like being outdoors. And started gun deer hunting, and really enjoyed that. I was actually the only one of my the cousins and all the kids I got to hunt with my grandpa, which is kind of just a unique thing.
Sure, yeah. And so important too, really, for developing that culture for you, right?
Yeah, no, one of my favorite pictures I have is just a picture of me, my dad, and my grandfather, and it was like one of the last years he got out, and it was, it's like a cherished photo of mine.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So, and after that, I just started, it really wasn't until high school that I really got into the, really getting into the public land and, and archery hunting especially, that's where my true joy probably in hunting is bow hunting. And started doing that in high school, and first kind of just setting up on the ground. And like I said, I remember the first what I would consider really solid buck I killed on the ground, nice 8-point. He's maybe like 14 wide. Shot him on the ground out of a little vegetation blind that I built, and then shortly after that, the next year, I got a tree stand, and back then I was just like literally strapping my back and crawling up trees and stuff. You just climb, no ladders or anything. I never had any money for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I made a mask was a ski mask, and I painted some stuff on it so it looked like
yeah, I mean, that's kind of how, hunters and fishermen were like the most ingenuity.
You just come up with whatever you can.
Ingenuitive.
Ingenuitous.
Yeah.
So, and we tinker outdoorsmen. We just kind of tinker.
Always fiddling with my gear constantly.
And you started did you start locally here?
I pretty much always hunted here. I mean, it was until many years later I started really venturing out of Wisconsin or even out of the area. I mean, pretty much when I started, I was hunting just around here wherever you could drive. I remember someone first asked me where I hunt, and I couldn't even tell them because I've been driving there so many years. I didn't even know the names of the roads. I just drove there. I just went there. I couldn't even tell you the names of the roads, any of them that I was on.
Probably a good thing, though, right? Yeah, that way they can't get there. So
you actually have an interesting history with some of the public land around here, as far as your would consider your hunting party hunts. I guess you were talking about that earlier. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, my grandfather, after World War II, he'd originally been hunting with some, other, relatives and stuff. And, even back then, private lands start getting harder and harder, people selling off. And, a lot of the state forest land that's around here is all foreclosed land from the Great Depression. So, and I think a lot of that was still happening then, or people just getting out of farming in general. I mean, look at now, there's how many few farms there are. And I remember looking for stuff, and he found some, state land, and he started hunting there. So literally, even to this day, we hunt the same spot my grandfather found in 1951.
That's really cool.
That's impressive. Yeah. I guess I hunt public land up in northern Wisconsin, and the same thing, kind of the reason, honestly, we keep going back there is because we've been going there forever. There's really no reason even to keep going there other than that's kind of the tradition.
I kind of find it funny, like when we first started hunting, how like going up north was the thing. That's where you're gonna shoot a big buck, and going down here, you're just relegated to the scraps, and how much that has like completely turned around. Now, like
100%.
Here is the big bucks, and up there it's slim pickings, So a complete different mindset, even from when I was younger to now.
Well, why do you think that is? I know it's kind of north to south.
Well, I think you have a combination of things. Obviously, the reintroduction of wolves and has made some difference. There's more bear than there was. I mean, for a while there, I remember the population of bear being pretty low, and then it was really tough getting tags. Now, like Wisconsin, really one of the things they manage more for quality, for the quality bears, and obviously there's a quantity now that gives you that ability. I mean, to get good ones, but I think obviously the increase of predator populations have quite clearly made a huge difference in northern Wisconsin. You put some hard winters and stuff like that in there, and I'm sure that's where it makes a big difference. I mean, I've seen as the years gone, more and more guys.
Yeah, just
they go up there for the traditional hunt for the weekend, and they come back down here and get serious.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm really excited to kind of get more into this topic with you. It seems like public land hunting is really a hot button topic at the moment. It's really kind of been popularized, and it's you see the T-shirts with public land hunt, public landowner, and things like that.
You got THP and all these different places just really pushing that public hunting thing. But I mean, that's where most of us have that access is the public lands, and I think it sometimes it gets a bad rap, but there's a lot more to it than there is. And I mean, obviously there's popular places where there's a whole bunch of people, but I think with a little bit of work, there's definitely some places that nobody hardly gets into that you can get away from.
Well, I mean, like we talk about the access to people. I mean, Wisconsin spans like over 30 million acres, and like 17% of that belongs to the public, and you can have public access. But that's not even including MLF land and other crop source land and things that are in tax breaks. That's public access versus public land. So, I'm not super knowledgeable about these things, but I know
what's the difference? Like how do you know if a land is open publicly, if it's public access?
Well, that's always tough because obviously there's some tools, Onyx, Hunt Stand, a couple different things that you can use that you can pinpoint some of those things, because there's managed forest land, but there's an open and closed version of those, so you got to know which one it is. Two, they highly recommend if you're going into MFL to contact the landowner, let them know that you're going to be there in the first place.
So
and that it's still in the program.
So who might these landowners be? Just a regular person? Is it a company or?
Well, I mean, some of them are land trusts, which are whole families. So you'll find that so there'll be like an LLC or limited liability. Or, sometimes just people, they have a big tract of land. They want to keep the land, but it's tough to afford big pieces of property. So you put it in. I mean, it's kind of the same as putting CRP programs on your land and stuff. Those are tax breaks that you can use, keep in there, but sometimes that makes your land accessible to public access and stuff or public hunting.
Is all CRP land public access? Or
no, because you can have your land in CRP programs and not be access to
all MLF though, or
there's some MLF open in public, and you'll see it listed as open in public,
and that's on Onyx,
open or closed. Yep, Onyx will list it, and you can see it on there, and it'll call it. And see, the nice thing Onyx is you can put in layers, so it'll show you layers of public access. And WTF, Rocky Mountain Elk. I mean, because all these organizations have put money into public land. Some of them have bought them up, and they'll be accessible. And some of this stuff just doesn't show up on the standard stuff. I remember, for the longest time, there's a project, and it actually started more like, it was a trout project out in Plymouth here, but there's a lot of property that ended up opening up because of that to hunting, and it just, not too many years ago, that was all private land. So.
Well, that's interesting to know. I mean, how often is that updated on? So we'll talk about the Onyx thing coming up here, but so that comes into the fact of gains versus losses. Every year it changes. how often can you access that information to make sure that you're on the proper?
Well, I mean, obviously, most of these are all run by the DNR. So the beauty is when you find something, I mean, they do a pretty good job of posting the land, and especially if especially if they bought it or it's come into state trust, it'll be marked pretty well. When it comes to MFLs and stuff like that, it's stuff that you definitely probably want to contact them first, because they'll usually, I mean, there's plenty of them out in there. I remember when I first started hunting, some other, like the Trout Unlimited had opened up some land, and that all became sponsored, through the DNR. I actually called about some of it because it wasn't listed and it wasn't showing up on my GPS as open, but it was. And then also literally a year after that, all the markers.
Yeah. Okay.
And they've done a lot better job in the last couple of years of marking boundaries and stuff.
And so now in the last few years, the gains versus losses of public land, is it more geared towards gains of public land, or are we kind of, where are we at?
I think we've gained more, especially around here. I mean, I think one thing we have really to our advantage is a lot of public access around here. I mean, there's places that just have zero.
There's, especially out in the Kettle Moraines. I mean, the land that we used to hunt, or that we hunt for our gun deer season, they want to buy that, and they bought every piece of property around it. So now we're like hoping we don't, I mean, as much as I hunt private land, we hope we don't lose the private land, but a guy like you is like, oh, here comes the public.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and it's hard to see when they're going to do it, but I mean, there's just around where I hunt, where I was talking about my grandfather hunted, hundreds and hundreds of acres have opened up since like the 80s, when I remember going out there, like the whole east end of it, all to like the edges of the private boundaries, because all those cornfields when I hunted when we were kids, and that's all DNR access property now.
I think a big thing that some people, like, you hear a lot of that we're losing our public lands, but now I guess it's a regional thing as well, but in Sheboygan County and our surrounding areas, it seems like we're gaining more and more public land every year. So the public's getting access to some of the better hunting spots.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, even spots like the DNR does lease programs where it's walk-in access. There's a whole bunch of it in Ozaukee County where you walk around. I mean, a lot of it's just fields.
Yeah.
But there's little patches and little spots in there, and you hunt it right and access it correctly.
Yeah.
There's some action to be had in some of those spots, and it's kind of neat.
I definitely want to get to that a little bit later too, Pete. You had been talking a little bit about Onyx and finding these places, but I think for Onyx you need to pay a subscription fee. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you have any idea what that is off the top of your head? Is it?
It depends. You can buy like just a Wisconsin subscription or small subscription. I get the unlimited because I've used mine out west, and you can download. You can like actually download for like you don't have Wi-Fi or something. You can actually pre-download maps. So I get the unlimited. It's like $100 a year.
Okay.
So it's not super cheap,
Reasonable.
But to me, it's well worth the.
Yeah.
For you, the reward certainly meets the investment. So
most definitely.
Exceeds the investment probably. Are there just at first, when maybe you didn't have this access to that, how are you able to find new public lands?
Well, when I first started doing that, I was just using Google Earth.
Okay.
Google Earth, the state maps. I mean, nice thing like, Kettle Moraine, Southern, Northern, you have a pretty nice map that you can actually pick up. It's pretty big. And combination using the maps and just like, Google Earth. I mean, obviously it didn't give you borders, but you knew something was a piece of public land, but you'd never walked in there before. Instead of just wandering, I mean, not that I mind wandering around for hours on a piece of property, but sometimes, especially during the season, you're trying to find something new, you're not seeing anything, I need to get into a new spot, and you can pinpoint on Google Earth, just by, looking at where swamps or, some sort of, habitat diversity converges, and that's what I originally looked for. I remember, I think it was like 2012 or 13, finding this pinch point on Google Earth, and I walked in there, and actually that was one of those, I literally put my stand on my back, walked in there, found this spot, and hunted it that day, and I actually saw a buck in there, and it was just a neat spot where two ridges dropped down into a small swamp, and there's a little crossing, and then it popped into another ridge that ran into a bedding area, and it just was like That was when it like opened. I'm like, wow, this actually works, and this, you can really find some neat terrain and stuff that you just would. I mean, you could I might wander on that whole woods and never find that spot.
Yeah.
Or totally access it the wrong way, or find it, and from one side, if you access it, it wouldn't look as good as where I accessed it from.
Sure. Yeah.
So
It's all on that kind of just that surface, maybe that curb appeal. Maybe you look at something one way and you turn and you look at it a little differently.
Well, yeah,
It might
most
look
definitely. Like
completely
I
different.
accessed it from a major trail, and this ridge had just like rub lines and scrapes, like old stuff all the way down in there, plus new stuff. When you access it from the other area, well, you're kind of buttoning up to the bedding area, and there wasn't a lot of great like sign on that northern edge.
Yeah.
So if I access that now, I use that spot to access it now because it's a way better way to access the spot.
Sure.
But I never would have probably even bothered to hunt it had I not seen the sign. I mean, it's tough to just go sit in something just because it looks good on a map, but there's not the sign there.
Right.
It still could be good. You never really know. Like sometimes you're just hunting travel quarters, and some travel quarters don't have a sign, but it's a travel corridor because you scouted or saw, footprints or something. That's why I like, getting out in like winter and stuff, because sometimes you can see prints or the way something's being accessed where you don't see it on the leafy ground.
Yeah.
It's just hard to see.
And so now that kind of comes down to how you scout from home and then boots on the ground type of stuff. So what's at home, what are tools that you would use, including Onyx, including Google Earth? Is there any government websites that people have access to?
Actually, the DNR has their own little app, and it's got a map and stuff too.
Yeah.
But I mostly just go on like the DNR website because it'll give you some maps and information. There's actually a whole bunch of maps on there that you can look at that give you access in public hunting and access zones. That you can look at that way. And I mean, that's how I spent the majority of my time originally finding spots, was doing that. I didn't really get into the map stuff, like, like detailed, geography maps until I started hunting out west.
Okay.
And that was before, like we were getting into, everyone had GPSs, but like my original GPS it had no terrain. It had no elevation. So it was hard to see, but it was just, you get to point A to point B, but I couldn't see anything, so you needed the map. So we had lots of colored maps that we would look at, access points. You could see that. It wasn't until, I remember the first, my buddy got a Garmin GPS, and you could pay a subscription, download topographical satellite image maps onto it. And that was like a game changer because, when you have that satellite image, there's no way you would know that there's a meadow on this bench or something.
Yeah,
You
right,
exactly. You had no way to know that, or like that in the middle of this woods there's this little swamp patch with an island or something. Like I actually just recently scouted, and I'd only seen it on GPS, an oak island that and the only reason I could access it because it was winter and it was ice and but I've never actually gone out there, and I wouldn't want to just walk out there any random old time and look at it. Found out there's a ton of tornado damage on it, so it was kind of like, don't even know how good it's gonna be. But it was kind of nice getting out there, and I never would have saw it without the GPS. And you just see a swamp. Like if you just see a swamp or empty ground, you never know what those little things. And it's such a flat swamp, and even this island isn't very big. It isn't very raised, but it's fairly large.
So Tyler, you kind of mentioned, starting out scouting on your computer, and then we talk about getting boots on the ground. What do you think's more important, Pete, when you're first? Because I think of this from my standpoint. I don't do a lot of public land hunting, but I'd like to get more into it. I want to be able to have that confidence to get started. What's something that I'm looking for? How much time do you spend looking at things from home before you ever even set out? What's more important before, is it at home scouting? Is it in the woods scouting? What's the most important thing? And how do you find that place that you think, gosh, I'm going to go there and I think that's going to be a good hunting spot?
Yeah, no, good question. What I look for, boots on the ground is by far the most important. And sometimes it's just fun to get out. It's good off-season exercise,
So you're scouting 12 months a year.
I
Basically.
scout all the time.
Yeah, see?
I'm always out scouting.
And so, but that's in a couple of different ways, because I know you so well, Pete. Like, you're involved in fat biking, you go shed hunting, you're looking for turkeys, you're looking for squirrels. So, I mean, all of those, you're compiling this information. You know what I mean? You've got to get outside and actually do it. And I think that's kind of what.
No, I mean, that's more important than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can do this. I mean, people have been scouting and going into spots and finding great places well before we had all this, e-scouting. E-scouting obviously makes it a little easier, and I think it makes it's a little easier for the layman. Because I mean, how many times you go look at a map and then you're looking at map datum and trying to figure out coordinates on a map and put it together and get in there. I mean, because okay, I see that on a map, but I'm in the middle of Canada. How do I walk out there? Where is it? How am I finding that spot? So obviously, a map can make a difference. On a GPS, the beauty of that you can go on Onyx, look through all the things, set a pin on there in that spot, and now you can
Just
get
there.
out there and track right out to that spot. So it makes it a ton easier, and more accurate. I mean, heck, I mean, there's plenty of times like you and we fish up in Canada, and I actually found out that when I went out fishing with you that I deer hunt in that same general area with a group of guys that I go out west with. And that
was data compilation as well.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
well, I remember I'm like sitting there like, I want to check this spot out real quick, and I'm like always scouting, like anything.
Yeah, you never miss an opportunity, right?
I mean, half time like rabbit hunting and stuff turns into like we're in the middle of a hardwoods where there's no rabbits because I turned into a scouting mission because I saw some sign.
Yeah.
But no, I'm always looking that way. But I remember one time trying to get in until you get. There was some value in actually learning to read a map, because I remember trying to access a spot. And I went in there like 3 times. I could not find a spot until we actually got out the big map. We actually, used rulers and found the actual GPS, and then wrote down all the coordinates off there, and then input it into GPS to find that spot. And it was pretty cool, and it ended up being like a phenomenal spot. I mean, it doesn't look it right off and it's really close to a road. But this road is an access road that takes you forever to get out to, and you never see a car the whole day.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about like electronic resources and gear that you have. What other resources do you employ when you're specifically hunting public land versus private? Is there anything like, something that you might bring with you? I don't know.
Well, because like until recent years in Wisconsin, you had to remove your tree stand every day. Now you can leave it in, but there's still, if you go hunt out of state, there's still areas that there's a lot of areas where you can't leave standing. So are you like, how do you combat the different rules and like potential people messing with your stuff? And
I've always been kind of a mobile guy, so. Mobile setups. I like mobile setups, something you can get up and down real quick. I mean, and that's been kind of the cool thing lately too. I was doing that years ago. I remember everyone telling me like, "Well, a climber, why would you even bother to make so much noise?" But I'm like, yeah, but I'm so much more mobile with this, and I can get up and down, and like where some of those spots I hunt, and I've made the mistakes in years of leaving stands up too long or hunting the same spot all the time, but I find that I think a lot of people say this, and I just definitely some truth. Like usually the first time you hunt a spot is going to be your best time hunting that spot.
Yep.
Especially on public.
Yeah.
It's like any difference, any, sign that you leave scent is automatically going to alert every animal that's not used to seeing anybody access. And some of the, even down here, there's some pretty big tracts of land where those deer never go to agriculture or move, from some small little core area.
Sure.
Okay.
So, unless maybe during the rut or something.
Yeah, I mean, and they will, but I mean,
in general, they kind of stick to.
I had a friend of mine, and when he was first getting into the public, and especially accessing down here, and I shot a 7-point. It was pretty deep in. It was this pinch point spot. I found I ended up shooting a 7 down there, a nice 7-point, and we cut them open. I always like to cut open, like after I get them gutted out, I like to look and see what they're eating.
Okay.
And I told him, like, I bet you this buck doesn't have any kind of agriculture because we're, like, literally 3 miles away from any kind of field. And we cut that thing open, and it was just acorns, greens. There was no corn. There was no, seed from somebody's bird feeder in it.
Yeah.
This deer had never really ventured out of this little core area very much. So you going in there all the time, definitely gonna, alert them to their presence. So, but like I said, mobile. I like to say mobile.
So what about? We're kind of on the topic of just basically deer hunting at the moment. What about rattling antlers? Do you have a bag or the little handheld clickers?
I'm definitely a rattling antler person.
So true antlers.
Yeah, you will notice when you rattle antlers, they actually make a distinctive smell. It smells like burnt hair. When you're really getting into a good rattling season with real antlers, it makes a distinctive scent. And I think the sound and the scent, it does. You just never know I remember someone told me this.
I'll take your word for it.
No, it does. It's especially if you're doing a really aggressive sequence.
Yeah.
You're doing it, else and you're like, oh, like it smells like burnt hair.
Huh.
And,
interesting.
And my buddy Ben, the guy I hunt out west with, I remember him telling me this, and I had the same reaction. He's like, when you rattle at one, it sounds totally different than a plastic or some Lincoln logs in a bag. And two, he goes, it makes a distinctive smell, which I think just is one of those extra little bits that makes a difference. Do I think the smell makes a difference? I have no idea, but I'll definitely tell you, you'll notice it when you're doing it, though, especially if you get into a really good and I love rattling in bucks. There's nothing more exciting than rattling in a buck. I actually rattled in one for a buddy of mine, and he said he'd never seen it work.
Yeah.
And I rattled, this buck came, like, literally I told him, like, you need to be paying attention if they come in, they're going to come in really quick, and he's relieving himself, and here comes this buck through the swamp. Really, I actually have this whole sequence on film. Comes in, starts rubbing a tree, and then he was also telling me how bleat calls don't work.
Yeah.
So I grunted, got his attention, did the bleat call, and he just came right in. I could have killed him like 10 times over because I was in a different tree, and he had no shot whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So that's one thing that maybe, having some of these other accessible things, maybe more mobile type accessories, where you think like, there are some places that you've got to just have the real thing.
Yeah.
So that might not be a piece of gear.
It's a personal thing.
Yeah.
I mean, have people rattle in with stuff?
Yeah.
I'm sure they have. I can tell you, I never had any luck with using them. It wasn't until I got a real set of antlers that it worked. But yeah, like I'm a caller, almost probably to a fault.
Yeah.
Like like going out turkey calling, you're just calling away just because
you're
bored not calling. So, so I like to call. Has it hurt me in the past? Probably, but I like doing it. But yeah, I definitely like calls, and I think obviously it has its time. And I think just like, you can use it too much or too early, but deer vocalize all the time. So, and I've seen plenty of times where, I've, grunted at a buck and had him come closer like in September. So, I mean, and just because there was another deer nearby and it was just interested what's there. So
we were talking, we mentioned turkeys and stuff like that. And I mean, I love turkey hunting, and basically the same spot. There's a lot of times I'm hunting right underneath my deer stand, Now, when what differentiates are you hunting different spots for deer or turkeys on public land than you are deer, or?
I definitely hunt different. Like obviously, turkey. I'm a running gunner. I love running gun hunting. I've shot some with bows. I've sat in a blind. It was cool. I enjoyed taking with the archery equipment, but I like running gunning with a shotgun. So it's a little different. But I can tell you, I found a lot of spots from deer hunting.
Yeah.
Like deer hunting. How many times? Like actually, one of my better turkey spots out, I found this roost location scouting for deer.
Okay.
Well,
but I'm always scouting for whatever they're signed for. So
that's a good point. Just and that's so important too, that you don't limit yourself to your scouting. Like when you're out hunting, you're scouting, and when you're scouting, you're not necessarily scouting for one thing. You're like just completely compiling knowledge. How do you keep it all in one spot? Do you ever write it down? You just all mental, or what's the deal? You've used any tools?
I
that way to
probably
help you out?
should write down. I hear a lot of people tell you that journals are really great.
Yeah.
Now Onyx and stuff, I can like literally drop marks that are specific to something, like it's an access point or it's a rub or it's a scrape on the ground. There's plenty of times where like I'll admit to like totally forgetting about
Yeah.
spots that I scouted just because of like there's so many.
Yeah.
Like
So
this,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh man, I drive past it. And I'm like, oh man, I should go back there. I've been
Yeah.
hunting this people, or I go back there and scout. Or there's those spots you scout every year and they look good, but then you get on such good signs somewhere else that you just don't end up making it. But I'd rather have too many spots to go to than not enough.
That's odd to hear when you're talking about public land hunting, especially when there's a lot of people that are like, there's not very much accessible public land, or there's people everywhere too. So is that an issue? Do you run into a lot of people?
Well, of course.
Or
I mean, even in the best spots, and you could go the good and bad part about like all this public hunting and stuff. Like, there's a lot more guys going in deep and trying to use some of these tactics. But I still find that the vast majority of people are sitting relatively close. And I think part of it's just the lack of woodsmanship, and like how many times you see someone that like marked a trail to their stand that's like 10 yards off the main trail.
Yeah.
Like, well, you just look up there, you should be able to, but some people just have, I mean, and I have a brother, he just loses direction real easy, like just does no real good sense of direction. So he'd be one of those that usually stays relatively, he's kind of like, I am definitely one of those people trying to find, I mean, I like to mean deepest, but sometimes it's that overlooked easy spot. I hunted this spot right next to the road 2 years ago, which is right off the parking lot. And it was great. Didn't see a lot of big bucks, and they weren't coming into it. But I mean, I was seeing a lot of action, a lot of deer.
Yeah.
And it was really close to the parking lot, really, really close. And I just, like, guys just weren't using it as one of those spots. It's almost impossible to hunt off the ground. It's so thick, so you got to get up in a tree to see anything, or you're just gonna be wasting your time.
So I've heard about guys going in 2-3 miles or something like that. One problem that I always have, Pete, is like, if I'm going that far, I'm sweating. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, I know exactly
and
what you mean.
so there's about a million different reasons why sweating is not good. How do you combat that? Like, I know you got scent when you're sweating. You've got the cold factor, because once you're sweating, you're gonna get cold. So what are some things you do? Do you change clothes? Do you?
I have changed clothes to some. I don't pay as much. I used to be a scent freak, like all the scent lock gear, I still pay attention to scent, and I'm one of those, I don't sit there wearing a ton of scent lock gear, and I don't pay attention to that. Like, I play to win more. But I also don't like bringing in extra scent that I don't have,
Sure,
and obviously sweating it out. So I'm a huge proponent of layering. Like, layer. You will never see me hauling in some one big thick parka walking out in my bibs.
So that might be one more piece of that gear that you need. Probably a backpack, right? You're going to be bringing.
Yes, I mean, I wish I could show a picture, because I have a great picture of my stand.
We'll pop one up. We've got this on YouTube.
Definitely.
We've got it on Facebook pictures and stuff. So
I use a mobile setup, and one of the reasons, right now the really popular thing is super ultra light, like cutting your sticks down and making it so light and bringing nothing in there. My biggest problem with that is, like, you're going in there and you're cold all day, and I think when you're cold, you fidget. When you fidget, deer see you and you blow your, I like to be comfortable, and, like to try and keep it. So obviously I try and keep my setup as light as I can, but I actually use a bigger pack than I would see. But that way I can get the gear, and it depends where I'm going, like an early season spot, or if I'm just going in a short distance. Especially when you're going in 3 miles, well, who the heck wants to walk back out? And during gun deer season, I'm a kind of a proponent, especially in opening weekend, doing all day sits.
Yeah,
just because let
people
other people, let other people push those.
So that's one way that you get the kind of the pressure to work for you rather than against you.
Exactly. But I like to, like, I'll pack in like all my clothes, and I always tell people I want to be almost uncomfortably cold when I walk off from the car. Because, like 5 minutes in, you're like already, you're still sweating even wearing a base layer. So, but getting to the access, getting away from people, like I just, there's all kinds of ways to get away from people. And I think a big mistake a lot of people make during, especially like gun deer season from the bull season. Bull season, you're always looking at all the sign. And by gun deer season, most of that sign is pointless. Okay. You're either in a lockdown stage, or they're really towards end of rut, and obviously you can hit second ruts and later action. But like, especially for gun deer and to get away from, pressure, like bull hunting on even public lands here and here, I hardly ever bump into anybody.
Okay,
and
that's a good point.
I find often enough, like especially, talk to the hunters that you see. Like I stop and if you're in a parking lot with somebody, instead of like looking at like, oh, how dare they be in my, oh man, they're gonna walk over and where are you guys going?
Yeah.
I think
okay.
I find more often than not, most people are more than willing to tell you, because they're like, hey, I'm not walking your spot, you're not walking mine, and if we are going to, no point in us both walking.
Yeah, and just to talk to each other there, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
So like, hey, I'm gonna be in this spot, I'm going there. Okay, great. And it makes great relationships. I actually have a relatively good friendship with a guy named Bob that I helped him my brother and I helped him drag a deer out there, gun deer, like long ago. And him and I communicate all the time because we bow hunt a lot.
Awesome.
And it works nice just because you just know where they are. They're willing to help you. They might even give you a tip. Well, I already tagged out, so hit this spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe like, hey, I'm going to be going there this day. And that way, like at least maybe you still decide to hunt there, but at least you know that they're going to be there. Safety reasons.
Him and I are both kind of like those. Like he's really old school, public, deep, but mobile. He's the first guy I ever saw using a climbing stand. Is the reason I bought one.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And so a lot of him and I hunt a lot of the same spots.
Sure.
All over the kettles, which is
Okay.
kind of, we just
So
have a
you'll
lot of,
bump into
we've
them,
been looking to see. So a lot of times you're like, hey, I'm going to be out on, V or something. Oh, okay, I'm going to hit this or that. It works really nice, But I find more often than not, like most people aren't, and jerks when you're, like bumping each other in the morning or both in the same spot. You communicate.
Sure.
It makes a big difference.
Yeah. I like that last week when I first asked you if you wanted to be on the show, you kind of said you were the public land hunter before public land hunting was cool. And I really love that because it's like
one of my little hashtags.
Oh, yeah, I know. Like, I was just thinking about this. Like, I hunt public land and I kind of see it as like a detriment. You know what I mean? Like, I see it as a negative thing, like something to avoid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, how many? I remember one of my buddies literally gave up bow hunting because he lost his private spot.
Yeah, well,
and I'm like, there's tons of spots. So there's tons of, I mean, especially in archery season, most of the public, there's not that many guys out there. Yeah. Especially like earlier in the season or during weekday. Like, I have a job where I have weekdays off a lot of times, so I'm perfect. Ain't nobody out there.
So maybe that might be another tip. Get a job where you have weekdays off when you can go out and scout all the time.
Yeah, without people, sure. It makes some difference.
Yeah. So that leads me into then like taking a piece that you think might be good. How big of a piece, like, can you just flat out overlook some pieces? Or because the way I think about it is like, I know that there are these 80-acre parcels or something like that, or smaller tracts of land. I know that there's going to be somebody there every single time. What's your way to combat that? You just get out there before these people, or?
Well, I'll admit that I tend to be like an early get out there. Just usually I've got equipment I'm hauling out there, and I want to be set up and stuff. Well, I don't need to be out there like hours before daylight, but I want to be sitting there setting up while it's daylight and deer coming through. And I've had that happen, where you're like sitting up there, you're pulling your bow up, and here comes the biggest buck of your lifetime, and you're going,
So, but that, we talk about hiking in and getting all this, equipment in and this and that, but it's like some of these parcels, like 300 yards from one end to the other, and that there's going to be somebody there. Are you eliminating that right off the bat? You're thinking, I'm just going to find a bigger tract.
No, not necessarily, because, obviously, everybody's thinking that same thing, that somebody's going to be there, and if you don't go there and look, nobody's there. Yeah. There's plenty of times, there's places
you're going to be that person everybody's talking about. Hey, Pete's going to be there.
Yeah. Like, there's nobody in here today. Great, awesome. And it works out. Obviously, there's ways to eliminate a parcel. There's certain time, if it's late season and it's just a plain old, hardwood flat and there was no big oak, acorn drop, I'm probably not going to hunt there because there's no reason for deer to be there. Sure. And other than, those big flats like that, the only time, you're going to see a lot of deer when there's acorns or there's some browse and or the rut because they're running these ridges and using the thermals looking for, but there's certain times, obviously, that there's no good reason to be there. Oddly, you can go at any spot and see tracks and go, why is anything even walking through here? But, I walked through this swamp spot to look for this island, there wasn't a single track out there, and the reason being there was no reason for any deer to go out there. There was nothing to eat there.
And now I guess Wisconsin deer season just wrapped up. We're filming this episode in January, so it just wrapped up, or is just going to be wrapping up. I don't exactly know, to be honest. I'm tagged out, so I get to relax. But now that it's late season, it's after the gun deer season, everybody complains that all the deer are scared and they're gone
or
and
dead.
they're dead and all this other stuff. How does the pressure of the gun deer season change the way that you hunt into the later part of the season? Do you start seeing those deer coming back to normal?
I don't think it takes that long for them to come back. I'll admit in the past I would get mad when people spend too much time pushing because I usually find that you give a spot 3-4 days and those deer start moving around pretty good naturally. Okay. Big bucks always being somewhat the exception. But late season, you got to be smart about the way you do it. Like obviously, like we were just talking about, if there's no there's no acorn drop, and you're sitting in some wide open hardwoods, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of anything because you got to be where deer are, and that's boots on the ground looking. Nice thing about snow is you can find lots of tracks and. And snow deer leave some pretty distinctive sign where they're spending a lot of time, beds, droppings, and stuff. So, like I'm always a proponent of scout, and don't assume, because right. even when you have food, you ever look at a field and like there is no deer using it, full of corn, everything, but they're sitting in some other field because there's some old alfalfa and that's what they want to eat that day for whatever reason. So
okay, so now. Are you a guy that uses trail cameras? Are you a shiner? Are you one that hunts a particular deer?
And let's talk about legality too of that, because that's a good point to bring up. And are you afraid to use a trail camera because you're afraid it might get stolen, or if it's even legal?
In public lands it's legal. You're supposed to mark them and everything. And I do use trail cams, but I use trail cams kind of to see deer that are using an area so much. Especially in private or public, I've seemed to find that the more, like obviously if you're going in and checking his camera all the time. Now, obviously these cellular cameras are a little bit of a game changer. It's something I would like to play around with myself. I haven't, but I know guys that have been using them, even on public. And that eliminates that you having to walk in there. And that's one thing I actually was joking with a friend of ours, Ryan. And I said, I always do better in the years that I don't set a ton of trail cams. And I was so busy racing this summer, I never set up a single trail cam. And I went off of pure scouting. I mean, I got some scouting done during the summer, but I do a lot of my heavy scouting time is spring.
Okay.
End of winter.
Why, why is that?
Because you see, like any sign, you might find sheds. If you find a shed, that deer is still alive.
Yeah.
So that makes a difference. And then the sign you're seeing is live deer. Problem with scouting even now and looking at rubs and scrapes and whatnot that deer might be dead.
Yeah.
So you're looking. I mean, obviously deer like stuff, and deer, bucks seem to kind of always end up going into these general areas that other deer have used. Like there's pine tree out where we hunt like. Every year that thing gets rubbed by some buck. I don't know what it is with that tree, but so those are big things. But I like spring because you might find sheds, and obviously sheds are a huge thing for me. Like sure. I'll use an example. So the buck I killed this last gun or this bow season, I scouted him, found his bedding in March.
Wow.
Okay.
And I made my whole plant, like you could see, and then like Onyx, you can mark everything. So I found like there was just like 3 different rub lines running out of this bedding area. And then I found obviously fresh sign. I actually jumped one of the bucks out of the bed in March, but that's like, I'm going to do it. That's the time I want to be bumping something and seeing it, because then I have plenty of time that I'm not going in there and bumping into them. And, so then I can see I have fresh sign. I know there's at least one buck in here. I found a shed in there. So all those things put together, it was kind of one of those, I just wrote, it was one of those, I actually did write that down and the dates and stuff I wrote. And I remember looking at that when I was in, like, I found this in like
That's awesome. And after the story's all done,
Well,
like you don't know that when you're writing that down.
So,
yeah,
like people
exactly.
are like, well, but you had no idea. I'm like, yeah, but I knew there was a mature buck in there. There was still fresh sign. I found big tracks in the mud, so I knew at least one good buck. And I mean, it was like a, beyond 4-finger track.
Yeah.
So, a couple things like obviously, tracks can get moved around the mud and snow. Sometimes they melt and they look huge when it was actually made by some doe. But I mean, all these things put together, old sign, bedding, it ended up being like a 5.5-year-old buck, and
That's awesome.
And I don't think this deer was ever leaving this one little spot of a ridge.
That's impressive on public land, man. 5.5 years when typically, I think a buck, it's really, really lucky if it makes it past its first legal rack. So
usually I consider on public land, I mean, especially some of the pressured stuff around here, unless you can find that. I mean, there's always that big one tucked in somewhere or really close to someone's, you can find that little access where they're cutting between private and public. This is deep in, and I've set trail cameras up within 60 yards of the trail he came in and never have gotten a picture of that deer.
Yeah.
Never even got a picture of a good buck coming out of there at all. But then when I found the sign, I'm like, there's got to be something coming out here. And,
Is that the biggest buck you killed?
Yeah, it's my biggest buck.
Okay.
That's
well,
amazing.
and if Pete's all right with it, we'll put some pictures of all of his gear set up and probably a couple deer he's killed, turkeys and all that other good stuff will be on our Instagram and Facebook pages. And it's just so interesting to hear how good public land can be when it gets such a bad rap. It's interesting. Makes you want to hunt public land. It really does.
I know. Listening to you, I was just like, can we go now? Can we go scouting now?
It's not like I'm always anxious. I'm always waiting for the next thing. Now it's like turkey season. It can't come fast enough.
So obviously this was pretty much the apex. Killing the biggest buck. Do you think that you measure success differently than somebody who does get to hunt something that they manage themselves and continually, hunt year in, year out? They know that deer by name, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, to a point. I mean, I've always taken like public land hunting as kind of this like little badge of honor and stuff. And I mean, the thing is, like, a lot of people have asked me questions throughout time on how to do it, what to do, what kind of gear I'm using, whether they listen to me or not. Usually they don't, but.
That's because they don't want to put in the effort. Let's be honest. You know what I mean? Like, work harder at this.
My hunting is usually not the super fun kind of hunting, but like I will do that kind of stuff, and I've always kind of taken as like that's my thing.
Sure,
I like do that, and I mean I think. I'm always hunting just for like the most mature deer that I can get. And I've shot plenty of smallish bucks, and like my gun buck this year was nothing special, but he was shot
wounded, right?
Yeah, so I had no problem, and I don't feel the least bit bad about it because oddly enough, in my 34 years of hunting, I'd never taken a buck in the gun deer season and archery in Wisconsin.
That's incredible.
I've taken separate. I've gone to another state and shot a buck, but I've never done it here.
That's awesome.
But like
and my son beat me to it this year.
Yeah, you did it. Yeah.
But like you said, you're shooting a quality deer. Maybe not the biggest deer, but you're not shooting a 1.5-year-old buck.
You're not shooting the first buck that you see.
No, and I'm usually, I'll pass up. But I mean, I can use, as good of a season I had this year. The season before that last year was just a struggle. I mean, I was in the struggle cave all year round, just trying to find deer. And I started making some of those mistakes that, you start hunting. This one spot's got such good sign, and you're getting all these trail cam pictures. So you keep going in there and going in there and going in there, and seeing less and less deer every time you do it. And it ended up being where I ended up like finally started moving. Like I was just hitting too many these couple spots, just too much.
Yeah.
And getting super frustrated. It wasn't until I like got mobile, jumped into this other spot where I ended up like having a day where I ended up seeing like 12 bucks. Nothing really huge. I shot like a nice 8-point that ended up running out into a river and dying in the middle of it. Had to, wade out there and get it. But, so I mean, I think it makes you appreciate it that much more.
Yeah.
You're working hard. You're not, I mean, and I'm not taking anything away because, I mean, I think a person on private land, if you're taking your land and managing it and doing that, you're working just as hard, just in different ways.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. If I got a chance to hunt some, private land in Buffalo County and
Yeah.
I'm all for that.
Try it. You'll give it a shot, right?
I'd love to do something like that. But I've had some private. Even when I've had private places to hunt, I've always go back. I still spend probably 80% of my time hunting the public.
Yeah.
But you get to see that much more. You get certain spots, like even on a private land where your spot might only be a travel corridor, or the bedding might be on a different property. So you only know there's certain specific times you're going to see something. So just sitting there all the time isn't guaranteeing you seeing anything just because you're on private, So
I like that because a lot of times, and especially the further we go, the more the farmland, the ag land gets broken up around here, the parcel of private might be smaller than the parcel of
that's
public.
what I like about the public is like when something isn't working or something is working and deer are using something specific. This year there was a great acorn drop. So it made big woods hunting all that much better, but we hadn't had a good drop in a while. So like all the egg guys were just killing it.
Yeah.
And us were just struggling. There's deer there, but they're just, I think they were moving later and, and they were, or bedding closer to, a good, reliable food source. But when something is working, the spot that I had that was private, it didn't have a single tree on it. Not one.
Yeah.
So this is a good oak drop. And I'll stand by this 100% that I think, especially big bucks, and that was one thing I was telling Buddy and we ended up getting him a buck because he was just struggling. He was hunting a lot of edges, and it was keying in. All those big mature bucks were keying in on acorns. All the sign I was seeing was in the woods and acorns. And if you had a spot that didn't have good acorns, you could go scout a spot that had acorns.
Yeah.
You're probably going to see something, even if it was fairly pressured, because they were just hitting the acorns. So. I think it gives you, there's so much more land, to use. You can access different stuff, and then you can hit it different, like swamp edges or, I was like, we were talking about what I look for in a spot is, habitat diversity. One of my favorite spots is it's a hardwoods ridge that drops into an edge of a swamp that's abutted by a field with a strip of pine, and they travel up and down this pine through the bottom base of that ridge, and then they'll shoot out into this swamp area and over to this little knoll that runs out, this little finger that runs out in that swamp, and it just has all kinds of diversity. It's got everything you can ask for. It's like there's really nothing else that could be there other than a desert,
Sure. Yeah.
So there's so many things. Like what I like about this spot is if they're eating just regular, like woody forage, that's there. If there's good acorn drop, it's there.
You've got
water,
far more chances.
It's there.
Yeah.
Bedding, it's there. So I just, one of those spots that just consistently is usually pretty good.
Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about all these different things and learning public land and how to find plots of land. Now, when you have done some out west hunting, and I've done out west hunting. Dave, have you?
Nope.
Dave's not done out west, and I did public land out west hunting, and we did a lot of scouting. Now this is years ago, and we did scouting before we got out there, but we were not successful with the public land thing. But what's cool is now you're taking the same knowledge you learned here in Wisconsin and maybe applying it to different species and different forage base and stuff. But now you go and take it out west. So what knowledge do you think is the most important to use, whether you're Wisconsin, Minnesota, Dakotas, Colorado? Doesn't matter species, doesn't matter.
Well, I think animals use different things in like food sources, whatnot. I'll use a 2016 hunt and then this hunt. So in 2016, when I was out west for elk, it was super dry, and they weren't accessing and using these high meadows like they would normally be using. So we were just, and what we ended up doing is, it was a second season rifle out there, and we were focusing on just moving because the calling wasn't working, and we were just glassing. Where I hunt, it's called the Uncompahgre National Forest, which is like the unfriendly National Forest. It's a super rugged and it's not a great place to glass, but we were finding some cut. What we did is just, GPS and maps and finding canyons and cuts and stuff like that we could glass into. And that's ended up how I killed my bull.
Yeah.
Was by glassing cuts. And we found this bull, he was just a battle beaten. He'd have been like a 325 bull if he hadn't busted one side off.
Oh, geez.
And it's like middle, so I mean, how, imagine the power, to bust it off. But he still looks cool. He's got this club look to him. But, and I found he was all by himself on this bench, and he was like, tired, and he was done. He had enough. So
incredible.
So all that stuff compiled. Your GPS is probably your number one.
I mean, I think GPS even around your people are like, well, I know the area. I'm like, yeah, but it's easy to, see things and mark things.
Yeah.
On, using some of these different, like Onyx, HuntStand, Google Earth.
Yeah. So species, we've done a lot of talking about big game hunting. What are some of your maybe favorite things about public lands for smaller game, pheasants maybe, or rabbits, squirrels, waterfowl maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the spot, I have a little waterfowl spot I found because in this pinch point spot, it's a little swamp, and there's this deep hole in there, and it just mallards pile into this thing. And it's like this middle of nowhere, woodland hole. But it's deep enough that ducks seem to want to hang in there. It's not just a watery spot. They're just landing for a second. They'll hang out there all day long. And there's some little spots. And then there's some, some trees and little bushes out there they tuck into. And so I've never known that spot. Like, sitting in my tree stand, like, man, I got to go duck hunt that spot sometime. Last year, the first time I got a chance to do it, because once I finally take it, I'm like, well, I got a couple of days before gun deer season. I'm going to go try and duck hunt. And then of course the ducks weren't there when I went in there. But
yeah,
I love rabbit hunting and stuff like that. And I mean, again, a lot of these things are excuses. You go out, I like eating rabbits, and two, it's just another time to go scouting and stuff. But a lot of times I found those spots by scouting for deer.
Yeah.
I was out and I'm kicking up rabbit. I'm like, well, this looks like a good spot out there. Mental note, we had to hit this for something. The worst parts about my spots, especially for a quick rabbit hunt, is they're not quick to get to.
Yeah.
All right. So as we're kind of wrapping things up here, we want to talk about Pete's biggest mistakes.
Let's hear
What's
Pete,
your 3 biggest mistakes?
and how can other people avoid them?
Yeah, well, I think there's some simple things. I mean, we all get used to, doing something a lot. And I know, like, my top one is, hitting the same spot too much. Just hammering one spot over and over and over because the sign looks too good, or you've been seeing deer, so you just want to keep going. And the more you go in there, the less deer you start seeing. I've done that over and over. Like I said, last year that was my thing, and I remember I made a specific mental note this year that I'm like, I gotta, do what I do and keep mobile, keep mixing it up. I mean, there's those spots like rut. You could probably sit on some ridge and because you're always gonna have different deer moving through and see deer all the time, so you might get lucky there. But especially early season, once you've stunk it up and you've gone in there a bunch of times, it's gonna get worse and worse. Probably not. I've had those times where you want to hunt something so much so you don't pay attention to the wind, or you're they could come from anywhere and you don't pay attention to the wind. So you're hunting this spot, the wind's blowing right to where the deer are, and guess what? You get busted, because you just weren't doing it. And I remember this year specifically, the reason I killed the buck I did, because I specifically wanted to hunt this spot. I had actually missed this deer opening day. And I was hunting slightly to the south of his bedding. But I had a feeling he was, from the sign I saw earlier, he was accessing more to the north. And there was a spot that would be really hard to get into, but it's wide open. But I had to wait for an east wind to hunt that spot. So I had to skip like a whole week, and I barely even hunted because I just like, I know I'm going to go after this deer. I can get him. I know I can. And I went in there, and I remember getting out of work, and I was supposed to meet someone and go up to their camper and and hang out for the weekend. And I got out of work, and I'm like, we have an east wind. I'm like, I'm going out right
Change
from
plans.
here. I call him up. I call him up and he's like, you got to East Wind, didn't you? I'm like, yep, sorry, bye.
At least he was understanding,
Yeah,
right? Like
well,
anybody that
no,
knows you,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
just gonna know. Like,
So,
well, plans could
doing
change.
that, like just, and then, I mean, I obviously I could go into many things I do wrong. Over calling. I like to call. Some people say there's a time to shut up and there's a time to call, and nothing's happening and it's boring and you just feel this need, like, I got to make something happen, and just calling and calling. And you realize, like, I mean, how many deer are calling that much,
Haven't smelled burnt hair for a while.
Yeah, there's probably some guy in the ridge going, oh my God, what's that guy doing in there? But, those kind of things, I mean, there's plenty of other things, not listening to sometimes your first your first, intuition or react, to do something, and then you go against it and you should have. But so, those are probably the three ones that I think that, I've done, and and I'll probably do it again.
Yeah. Well, that's, some things, like, you like calling, so that's maybe maybe it's the fault, but it's like, if you want to get it done a certain way, that's,
and I like, calling when it works is so enjoyable and such a rush,
Yeah. So anyway, Pete, we are wrapping things up.
Right.
If anybody maybe wants to get a hold of you, do you want people to reach out to you at all, or do you
feel
want
free? Okay. I'm more than happy to have someone.
And what's the way to do that? You want to do email, Facebook?
I'm on Facebook. I actually just had somebody instant message me the other day about elk hunting.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So yeah, no, I mean, you send me a message or something. That's probably the easiest way. That way, if we, once I get the, talking to somebody, maybe I can exchange an email or a phone number or something that way.
So we'll link all of Pete's information on the posts that we're going to have about this podcast. And man, we really appreciate you coming on and joining.
I'm glad to
Thanks
have
very
it.
much, Pete.
It was much more enjoyable than I thought it would be.
You got the gift of gab, and we're glad to have that.
It was a crazy good episode 2. Way to kick off our little adventure we're starting here.
I would say episode 2, but our real first real episode,
our first
getting
real
a guest
episode.
in here
Cool.
and talking with you. So we really appreciate that, Pete. Thanks everybody out there for watching and listening. And this is Avid Outdoors, and we're signing out.
See you later.
This is Avid Outdoors.